Chapter 57. The look in his eyes was sometimes sharp, sometimes cold, sometimes painful, and sometimes complicated. All kinds of feelings intertwined. In the end, it was just a few mouthfuls of liquor, which led to a few heart-wrenching coughs. It was the first time that Shen Yueji saw Mo Wuxiang like this. He had always been high and mighty. He was not an emperor, but more majestic than one. Now, there seemed to be another world in his eyes. Under his ruthless and cold eyes, there were thousands of emotions. This was a beautiful picture. The handsome man, the quiet pavilion, the man was like a youth walking out of a splash ink painting. She couldn't bear to disturb him. But, cough, she covered her mouth and coughed heavily. Behind her, Double Happiness didn't know what rules were anymore. He just wanted to hit her with his arm. Sure enough, after she coughed heavily, the man's cold and gloomy eyes instantly shot towards her like a sharp glass. At that moment, she was riddled with holes. Shen Yueji couldn't help but shiver. She rubbed her arms for a while, then bravely walked towards the pavilion. She took a few steps. The man's eyes were even colder. Get out. The regent is here too. I have nothing to do, so I came to see the former empress. I didn't expect to meet you. Pretending not to see the man's cold face, Shen Yueji continued to walk forward. The surrounding ice flames were dropping rapidly. Shen Yueji sneered. I was afraid that I would meet the regent, so I put on a few more clothes today. I didn't expect, haha. I'm still so cold. Double Happiness. The man's cold aura didn't decrease, but increased. Shen Yueji was used to it. She swaggered across the pavilion, went straight in, and sat down. She wasn't close to the man, separated by a stone table. Actually, I'm also here to see the regent. I have something important to discuss with the regent. Can you retract the cold air from your body first? It's so cold. What do you want from me? I didn't control my strength last time and accidentally hurt your hand. Is it better now? Shen Yueji looked at his big hand and saw that it wasn't bandaged or applied medicine. The bleeding had stopped, but the bloody holes were very obvious. Above each wound, there was a large swollen area. Shen Yueji really blamed herself in her heart. The man's aura was imposing, and his pair of gloomy eyes were cold and gloomy. After a long time, his thin lips slowly opened. Accidentally? Shen Yueji, Shuang, she was speechless. Are you stupid, my lady? She didn't expect the man to answer her. Hadn't he always been disdainful of talking to others? Shen Yueji had predicted this, which was why she didn't mean what she said. Who would have thought that he would really find a way to continue the conversation? The smile on her lips froze as she met the man's dark eyes. At that time, the Prince Regent almost choked me to death. What I did was self-defense. Mo Wuxiang stared back coldly. She had planned to please him first. Seeing the man's reaction, Shen Yueji straightened her face. Since the regent doesn't give me face, I'll just say it directly. I want to confirm something with the regent. Silence. Shen Yueji gritted her teeth and raised her voice slightly. Last night, I followed the emperor to this Jiaoyang palace. Still silence. Chapter 58. He coughed so hard that it felt like he was going to cough out his internal organs. Shen Yueji pursed her lips as she listened to the sound. Was he doing this because of her? She didn't know where the courage came from, but she took a step forward and snatched the wine jar from his hand. He didn't expect her to be so daring. Mo Wuxiang didn't react for a moment as his hand was empty. Seeing the man's expression gradually turn ugly, the dangerous aura around him dropped rapidly. Double Happiness. Your Highness. Shen Yueji glared at him. Can't you see that the regent's wine is gone? Why don't you go get some wine? Double Happiness. Heh. What are you waiting for? Bring the best wine in the palace to the regent. Oh, yes. I'll go get it now. Double Happiness repeatedly agreed, and disappeared like a wisp of smoke. Only she and Mo Wuxiang were left in the quiet pavilion. Shen Yueji pursed her lips and put the wine jar on the stone table. She sat opposite him and looked straight into his cold eyes. I heard from Ji Chu that you haven't eaten anything since the late empress passed away. A normal person would have starved to death if they didn't eat for 7 days, like my big brother. Because I entered the palace, I didn't eat or drink for 7 days. In the end, I couldn't hold on anymore. My parents ordered people to press my head down and force me to eat a few mouthfuls of hot porridge. With your status as the regent, no one would dare to do this to you, right? How did you survive until now? After a long silence, Shunyueji tried to ease the atmosphere. She knew that the man wouldn't pay attention to her. She continued to say to herself, the Prince Regent's life is really tough. You want me to die? Isn't it good to be alive? Why do you want to die? The regent is such an outstanding person. If you die, who knows how many people in the world will be happy? He didn't say anything again. Why don't you eat something? She saw that there were a few plates of snacks on the stone table. In this deserted Jiaoyang palace, it was obviously his subordinates who had placed them for him. But he didn't move. She pinched a piece of pastry and put it in her mouth to taste. Compared to the desserts I ate in the perching Phoenix Palace, they taste great. She felt the man's gaze fall on her body. Shunyueji couldn't eat any more after a few. She looked up at him resentfully. You're the one who didn't want to eat. I just ate a few more because I was hungry. Why are you looking at me like that? Shunyueji felt embarrassed no matter how thick-skinned she was when he stared at her. She silently put the pastry that she had secretly taken back into the box. He muttered, as a man, can you not be so stingy? I only ate a few of your pastries. But speaking of which, the man ignored him. Shunyueji was quiet for a while, then picked up an Osmanthus cake and put it in her mouth. She said vaguely, yesterday, you went to the palace to find the emperor and asked the emperor to issue an edict saying that you want to drain the water of South Lake. What happened? Mo Wushang's eyes were filled with a layer of sharpness. What does it have to do with you? Chapter 59. Let's not talk about where to put the drained water, which place can hold such a large area of water in South Lake. Secondly, what if the bottom of South Lake is empty and you can't find the body of the former empress? Rather than the regent spending his time on this, it's better to manage the affairs in the palace. This way, it can be considered as seeking justice for the former empress. The man's cold eyes looked at her. What do you want to say? Yesterday, Double Happiness and I came out of Jiaoyang Palace and saw a two-headed man sucking the blood of a palace maid. She didn't see the change on the man's face. Not to mention surprise, there was no fluctuation in his expression. Shunyueji was even more certain that he already knew about this matter. Her heart leaped with joy, and she subconsciously sat close to the man. Seeing the man's unapproachable cold aura spread again, she hurriedly retreated in fright. After that man killed the palace maid, he turned and left. The palace maid's body was left in place, obviously waiting for the people in the palace to find it the next day. However, when I asked Double Happiness to go back to take a look, I found that the palace maid's body had long disappeared. Not only that, even the pool of blood on the ground and the blood-stained soil had been turned over by new soil. There was no trace of struggle. At first, I suspected that the two-headed man had just entered the palace. But then I thought about it. The palace is heavily guarded. How could he enter the palace so easily without anyone noticing? There must be someone controlling him from behind. You suspect me? If I suspected the regent, I wouldn't have come to the regent. I was thinking that this two-headed monster has someone behind him, and that person has been in the palace for a long time. Previously, I also heard that many palace maids in Jiaoyang Palace went missing. Because of their low status, they were suppressed. Of course, there are also people who put the name of the disappearance of the palace maids on the regent's head, saying that you executed them. The man's eyes were cold, filled with a faint cold light. So I was thinking that the regent had long known that there was someone in the palace causing trouble, but because they used the name of the former empress, the regent didn't want the former empress to be disturbed, so he found someone to dispose of the bodies of the palace maids behind her back. Seeing the man's cold eyes suddenly narrow. Her appearance, which was difficult to paint on a painting scroll, was like a cold and arrogant statue at the top of an iceberg. I am very gratified that the Prince Regent treats the late Empress so well. The icy aura around the man dissipated a little. What are you relieved about? I'm glad I didn't fall in love with the wrong person. There was another long period of silence. The eldest daughter of the Shun family had been pestering him for many years, but every time she saw him, it was like a mouse seeing a cat. Her almond-shaped eyes were filled with lust, and she did not dare to approach him. Purposely causing a huge commotion, humiliating themselves, injuring others, or acting arrogantly, all of it was to attract his attention. Every time this happened, he would scoff at it. For her to take the initiative to say that she liked him was very different from the last 2 times they met. He didn't hate her as much as he used to. In fact, he even felt a sense of familiarity with her. Even if Mo Wuxiang was unwilling to admit it. However, the feeling that spread out from his heart would not deceive him. From the first word she had uttered against him, a bold supposition had formed in his mind. Chapter 60. He was willing to let her get close to him without touching her. He was willing to listen to her say such bold words. She had repeatedly violated his taboo. He did not want to hurt her. He knew that she was not her, but there was a shadow of her in her. Mo Wuxiang resisted this feeling from the bottom of his heart. He felt that he had betrayed Shen Yueji. But Shen Yueji, whether it was her actions, her tone of speech, even her expression, when she was angry, they were all so similar to her. He simply could not bear to hurt her. He tried hard to ignore it. He tried hard not to think about it. He tried hard to hide the strange look in his eyes. Jiyu Yuqin was unique in this world. He did not want anyone to become her shadow, swaying in front of him. He did not want to disappoint Jiyu Yuqin. His feelings for her. Jiyu Yuqin was irreplaceable in this world. The feeling that Shen Yueji gave him was not the same appearance. It was not a deliberate imitation. Sometimes, it made him think that she was her. When you love someone, it is deep in your bones. Her behavior, temperament, and demeanor have long been engraved in your heart. It was not that Mo Wuxiang did not doubt it. He did not dare to believe those so-called nonsense. At the same time, he longed to believe it. If it was really like that, but why did she not acknowledge him? Did she hate him that much? Or did she still not let go of him after how he treated her? She still wanted to enter the palace to accompany him. Every time he thought of this, Mo Wuxiang's heart would be swallowed by endless anger. His cold heart was bitten and burned by the fire. That kind of pain was as if someone was holding a dagger and stabbing his heart. His heart was riddled with holes and dripping with blood. Why do you want to enter the palace? The sudden question made Shen Yueji a little confused. Shen Yueji subconsciously bit her finger. The man's sharp eyes suddenly narrowed and fell on her index finger in her mouth. Some habits were done subconsciously. Perhaps even she did not know it. Such a habit had long taken root in his heart. Mo Wuxiang's eyes suddenly jumped violently. There seemed to be countless flames jumping in them. His heart gradually became so intense that it was difficult to control. He could choose not to believe these so-called absurd remarks. Over the years, he had traveled to various countries and seen many unimaginable things happen, such as the 2 men that appeared in the palace. Although such a thing was strange and hard to believe, it did exist. She saw the way the man looked at her changed. It became urgent, expectant, and mixed with many emotions that Shen Yueji couldn't understand, just like her previous self. She panicked for a moment and suppressed the uneasiness in her heart. "Regent, are you drunk?" She pushed the dessert in front of her towards him. "Why don't you eat something? Trying to cool down the alcohol?" The man looked at her deeply. A pair of cold eyes seemed to be able to see through her. "Why do you want to enter the palace?" he asked again. His voice wasn't as cold as before. Shen Yueji didn't know if it was an illusion, but she heard a trace of humanity in his voice. Chapter 61. If you don't want to say it, I won't force you. Shen Yueji, he was a little more human. Did he fall from the high and mighty sky to the mortal world? Did he gain some humanity? Don't be like this, I'm a little panicked. When she comes back, I'll ask her to bring you some hangover soup. The man became silent, his eyes seemed to be bright and dark. She didn't know what he was thinking. Shen Yueji originally wanted to ask him about the 2-headed man, But now that Mo Wuxiang was acting like this, she was scared. She knew this man the best. His sudden change of tone made her think that this guy was possessed by a ghost. She slowly got up from the stone bench. It's getting late, I should go back, the future is long, let's talk again in the future if there's a chance. These desserts were her favorite when she was alive. Mo Wuxiang picked up a piece of pastry and slowly put it in his mouth. The moment the pastry entered his mouth, the greasy sweetness instantly filled his mouth. Such a sweet taste, in this world, only she alone could resist it. I like to eat sweet things since I was young, no matter how sweet the pastry is, I can resist it. Shen Yueji glanced at him, the feeling that Mo Wuxiang gave her, she didn't know if it was her illusion, she always felt that he saw through her. She and Feng Jiuqing were husband and wife for 9 years, some of the actions she did in front of him, she deliberately did it, he didn't suspect anything. Perhaps there was something that Shen Yueji herself had overlooked, that was, in front of Feng Jiuqing, she deliberately did some of the habits she had when she was alive. But in front of Mo Wuxiang, she did it subconsciously, unconsciously. But the daughter of the Shen family doesn't like to eat sweet things. The man murmured to himself. Master, this is the first time you've eaten in these days. In the pavilion. After Shen Yueji left, Ji Chu's tall and slender figure appeared in front of the man. His voice couldn't hide the joy in it. I won't return to the residence tonight. Master. Ji Chu looked at him in confusion. Master, are you going to stay in Jiayang Palace tonight? Mo Wuxiang looked indifferent. Master previously ordered us to drain the South Lake. Now, we are waiting for Master's order. If Master does not make the arrangements, we do not know what to do. Let's put this matter aside for now. I have something I need to confirm. Ji Chu was puzzled. In his master's heart, the eldest miss of the Jiyu family had always been the center of attention. He really couldn't think of anything that could be more important than the eldest miss of the Jiyu family. Mo Wuxiang gently pinched the Osmanthus cake with his fingertips, until the pieces of cake slowly dispersed from his palm. He needed to confirm Shen Yueji's identity. It was impossible for a person's temperament to change so quickly. It was impossible for two complete strangers to have the same preferences and the same behavior. Moreover, they would never fall in love with the same man at the same time. He had always chosen to ignore Shen Yueji's feelings for him. He had also seen the love she had for him in her eyes. Just like how he treated Jiyu Yuqin, cautious and fearful. How could such feelings change so quickly in just a few days? On the day Jiyu Yuqin was drowned in the lake, she had been pushed into the lake. Mo Wuxiang was an extremely intelligent person. Previously, he had been so engrossed in Jiyu Yuqin that he had forgotten about the lively Shen Yueji in front of him. When he carefully observed her, he realized that the feeling and palpitation that Shen Yueji gave him was the same as when he was facing Jiyu Yuqin. He couldn't help but tighten the pastry in his fingers. His fair hands clenched into fists. He wanted to confirm the ridiculous idea in his heart with a trace of expectation. If not for, he would definitely kill Shen Yueji with his own hand. Chapter 62. Phoenix Perch Palace. After Shen Yueji returned from Jiaoyang Palace, she lay on the bed and slept soundly. Double Happiness called her a few times, but she was still in a daze and ignored him. In the end, Double Happiness could only give up and let her sleep. In the latter half of the night, after sleeping for a whole day, Shen Yueji was finally awakened by the rumbling hunger in her stomach. She placed her hand on the corner of the bed and opened her eyes. She slowly got up from the bed. It was night. There was no light in the hall. It was pitch black and she couldn't see her fingers. Something was wrong with the touch of her hand, causing her entire body to tremble. As her hand slowly moved upwards, she felt a familiar warmth and a familiar aura. She didn't know why, but when she woke up the next day, she felt a sense of terror and panic, just like her previous self. The night was dark. She couldn't see the man's face. She could only tell from his strong and cold body that it was a man. And it was a very familiar man. She placed her hand on the man's chest and stopped groping. Her body suddenly trembled and her eyes were red. The sudden surge of fear brought her back to her previous self. The man's slender fingers flashed a thin ray of light. Soon, the light was switched on and everything in the hall was brightly lit. Shen Yueji saw the man's face clearly. As usual, he was handsome and incomparable. Thousands of words couldn't even describe a tenth of his handsome appearance. Her eyes were red and her frail body trembled slightly. Her hand was still on his chest. A pair of eyes filled with infinite pain, like a helpless bird whose wings had been broken. Mo Wushang. The woman's frightened expression was not the same face, but it was the same expression and panic. It made the man's heart ache. He only wanted to confirm something. He didn't expect that because he wanted to confirm something, he would hurt her unknowingly. He knew that it was his fault that made her so afraid. With a gloomy face, he got off the bed and strode out of the hall until his figure disappeared. His mind was haunted by the woman's panicked expression, which was mixed with hatred and anger. The wound on his hand tore open and blood flowed out. He didn't feel any pain. He stood alone in front of the window, letting the cold wind blow across his cold face. It's her, he confirmed it. In this world, no one understood her better than he did. He should have realized it earlier. She was really back. His large hand clenched tightly. His eyes were filled with many complicated emotions. Once they were exposed, it would be difficult to retrieve them. She didn't say anything, but who else could have acted as thoroughly as she did just now? That was the feeling of helplessness after experiencing it once. It was like sprinkling salt on the unhealed wound of the heart. After standing outside for an unknown period of time, Mo Wushang turned around and entered the inner hall. The woman had already put on her clothes and got up from the bed. She sat on the chaise lounge in a dignified manner. Seeing him come in, her lips moved. He pretended to be calm after losing his composure. Regent, have you not sobered up from the wine you drank during the day? Did you take the bed of Phoenix Perch Palace to be the bed of Jiaoyang Palace? Mo Wushang did not speak. He walked to the round chair opposite her and sat down. Shen Yueji's heart rose and fell. It would be a lie if she said she wasn't angry. What did this man mean? It was the middle of the night. Not to mention the middle of the night, when she woke up, it was pitch black and she touched a cold thing. Not to mention that she had experienced it before. Chapter 63. She gritted her teeth and stared at him angrily. Prince Regent, give me a reasonable explanation. Grandma's legs. She was so angry that she didn't even want to be polite anymore. I was wrong. The three simple and cold words that spill from the man's thin lips make Shen Yueji dumbfounded. She couldn't react for a long time. He was apologizing to her. Why did she feel that Mo Wushang was so strange today? Wasn't he the high and mighty Prince Regent who looked down on everyone? Even the Emperor couldn't enter his eyes. Now he was apologizing to her. His tone, demeanor, behavior, as well as his upright posture and slightly lowered head gave her the feeling that he was a child who had done something wrong. Only then did she realize. Shen Yueji's head suddenly hit the tea table in front of her. Bang, she felt dizzy. She must have had a nightmare. She still hadn't woken up. Mo Wushang's straight body suddenly stiffened. His cold and peerless face became gloomy. What are you doing? He pulled her from the tea table forcefully. He saw that her fair forehead was red and swollen, and a small bump was spreading rapidly on her forehead. The man's eyes were cold like ice cones. Your Highness, what happened? From afar, I heard noises coming from inside, and the sound of double happiness rushing in stopped abruptly. She saw the man's familiar back and his cold and inhuman face, and her mouth trembled. Your Highness is really amazing. You made the Emperor a cuckold so quickly. She hurriedly bowed and retreated. I didn't see anything. It was a stray cat. Yes, a stray cat. I'll take my leave. Shen Yueji covered her swollen head and gritted her teeth in pain. Prince Regent, the day before yesterday, it was daytime. You came to find the Emperor and trespassed into my Phoenix Palace. I won't say anything. But now it's nighttime. If this gets out, what will happen to my reputation? The man was as noble as ever. His eyebrows were like swords, and his voice was low with an indescribable hoarseness. Mo Wushang had always been a loner and wasn't good at conversing with others. Even if he wanted to find an excuse to brush her off, he didn't know what to say. Except for that one time, he had always respected her. Looking at the man's handsome face, there was rarely a trace of embarrassment. Shen Yueji covered her head with her claws and stared at the man for a while. Mo Wushang suddenly raised his head. Their eyes met. The man's pitch-black eyes were as cold as the moon and as bright as the stars. They carried the resplendence of pearls and were dyed with nobility that transcended the mortal world. His expression paused for a moment, and a cool voice slowly came out from the man's thin lips. I can bring you to find the corpses of those palace maids. Hearing this, Shen Yueji was astonished and hesitant. Why is Mo Wushang acting so strangely tonight? Could it be that you were impersonated? The man's face darkened slightly, and his black eyes shone. Who in the world dares to impersonate me? That's right, Shen Yueji nodded. Mo Wushang couldn't be impersonated just based on the fact that he trespassed into the palace in the middle of the night without being discovered. She originally wanted to say something, but after thinking about it, she felt that no matter what kind of medicine Mo Wushang had taken, he had already responded to her request today. She didn't care about anything else, but she had to investigate this matter first. Wait for me for a while. I'll go in and change my clothes. Chapter 64. A pair of dark, twinkling eyes fell on her, staring at her for a while before turning away. Shen Yueji entered the inner hall to change her clothes, while he looked away again in the direction she had just left. After changing her clothes and coming out of the inner hall, she saw that the man was still standing in the same place, not moving at all. She dawdled for a moment and walked in front of the man. I guessed that you ordered people to burn the bodies of those palace maids. It seems that you still kept them. Let's go. After saying that, she passed him and walked forward. However, she had only taken a step when her wrist was tightened and she was brought into the man's arms. Shen Yueji was shocked. Before she could struggle, her whole body had been locked in his arms. His broad and strong chest was close to her face. At such a close distance, the sound of his heart beating could be heard clearly. The man did not give her a chance to speak at all. He held her waist and jumped. Shen Yueji couldn't help but grab the man's clothes. One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Prince Regent, what are you plotting in your mind? No wicked ideas. The two of them were in mid-air. Shen Yueji was quite confident in his qinggong. The hand holding his clothes gradually loosened and was not so tight. Unexpectedly, when she had just loosened a little, she heard the man's cold and unhappy voice coming from above her head. Hold on tight. The man had a delicate jade face, bright eyes, moist lips, and a sharp nose. His face was clear and fair. At such a close distance, Shen Yueji could clearly see every detail of his face. It was exquisite and perfect, without any flaws. It was quiet, and only the sound of the wind was left in her ears. Her face was buried in the man's chest, and she didn't feel cold. The way they got along was too ambiguous. It always made Shen Yueji feel that something was wrong. Prince Regent, are you regretting it? After I entered the palace, you found that I no longer pestered you. Suddenly, you realized that in your heart, you still like me. Yes. A deep voice came from above. Shen Yueji was shocked. She looked up and saw the man's smooth white chin. It was moist and glossy, and from this angle, it was exceptionally mesmerizing. Soon, Shen Yueji's expression became cold. Sure enough, you are a fickle man. I thought that the regent was devoted to the late empress and had no regrets. It turns out that the regent is the same as those men. It's just for show. The force around his waist tightened. Shen Yueji felt the pain. She gritted her teeth and her face turned pitiful. Didn't the Prince Regent say that he likes me? Why don't you know how to have tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex? This consort's waist is about to be broken by you. Mo Wushang had a complicated look in his eyes. He looked at her with a pained expression. Afraid if he didn't hug her tightly this time, she would leave him again. Now that he was facing Shen Yueji, Mo Wushang finally understood what it meant to use his life to be careful. Shen Yueji looked at the Jiaoyang Palace in front of her. She didn't pay much attention to the man's expression until she got out of his arms. She was still a little surprised, You hid the bodies of those palace maids in Jiayang Palace? The man stood by her side and stopped for a moment. His face returned to its usual cold and noble expression. Follow me. They passed through the familiar palace of Jiayang Palace. Chapter 65. There were no traces of people here. Even the palace maids and eunuchs who cleaned Jiaoyang Palace had never been here before. The abandoned pavilion was piled with weeds. The man walked straight towards the pavilion. Shen Yueji looked doubtful and quickly followed. As expected. There was a secret room here. Covered with weeds, and no one would come to this place, so no one would know that there was such a secret room in the rear hall of Jiaoyang Palace. The man reached out to her after he went down. Shen Yueji did not hesitate and directly gave her hand to him. The secret room was not big, but it was definitely not small. It was brightly lit, clearer and brighter than the lights in the main hall. When I followed the emperor to Jiaoyang Palace yesterday, you were here too? Coincidentally, you were in this secret room, right? Mo Wushang's eyes were indifferent. Yes. As he said this, the man's eyes were as dark as ink. He saw that there was nothing strange on Shen Yueji's small face, but his dark eyes flashed a touch of darkness. No matter who it was, she could not remember. Shen Yueji's eyes scanned the secret room and finally found the body of the palace maid in a cage. She lay quietly in the cage, her body straight and stiff, still in the same state as before she died. The only difference was that the bruises on her face when there was no blood, now it looked like, in addition to the bruises, there was an additional black. Why is there only one? Aren't there a few more? Master, those bodies are struggling badly. I am worried that they will. Ji Chu's tone was worried and anxious. Halfway through his words, he saw Shen Yueji behind Mo Wushang and could not close his mouth in time. For a long time. Consort Shen, why are you here? Master. Master. He didn't dare to believe what he was seeing. Didn't Master always hate the Shen family's daughter? Why did he bring her here personally? It should be known that this palace was secretly built by his master for Jiyu Yuqin. Shen Yueji smiled. I have already buried the hatchet with the regent, and the regent said that he likes me. When he heard that I wanted to investigate something, he immediately brought me here. Ji Chu, he subconsciously looked at Mo Wushang. The man pursed his lips and didn't deny it. They are inside, I will bring you in. Hearing this, Shen Yueji quickly followed behind him. Even after the two had left for a long time, Ji Chu still hadn't recovered from the shock. Was it really his master who brought Shen Yueji in? But all this while, didn't he hate all other women except Jiyu Yuqin? How could this be? Shen Yueji was shocked by the scene before her. 3 women were kept in cages. Their messy hair fell off at a slow speed until there was not much left. Their scalps were black, and their facial features could not be seen clearly. Their eyeballs rested on their faces, but it was all pitch black. Their facial features and noses could not be seen. They lay in the cage, fumbling around with their hands. Their speed was very slow, and their bodies were stiff like wriggling maggots. These are the palace maids whose blood was sucked by the 2 men. Chapter 66. But that monster is extremely cunning, and he runs away very quickly. With this subordinate's martial arts, it's not difficult to catch him. But this is the palace after all. If this subordinate uses force, I will definitely be discovered by the people in the palace. After saying that, Ji Chu carefully glanced at Mo Wushang's expression. There was no fluctuation. Only then did he let out a long breath. His master was a vengeful person. Because of Jiyu Yuqin's matter, he was happy to see anything that harmed Feng Jiuqing. This was also the reason why they had been helping the 2-headed man to conceal the truth. Shen Yueji seriously sized up the 3 palace maids in the cages. They were struggling hard in the cages, some with little strength, some with great strength. And some of their faces had not completely turned black. Their noses and mouths were still there, but a black circle gradually appeared around their noses, and the black circle was spreading rapidly. Is there something in their bodies? It was a fact that the dead could not be resurrected. Their crawling and wriggling movements, in the eyes of others, looked like they were being controlled by someone. Living people would not do this. It's black mites. Mo Wushang frowned and said lightly, "Black mites." Hearing that, Shen Yueji looked at him and asked, "What are black mites?" Replying to Your Highness, black mites are a type of GU worm in the Western region. The Western region is good at using GU, and this GU worm called black mites is very common in the Western region. Black mites are completely black, and they like to burrow into the human body and reproduce inside. The young mites will devour the flesh and blood of the human body until there is not much left. Those who are possessed by the black mites will involuntarily want to suck the human's blood. Only in this way can they continue to live. The two-headed man in the palace should be from the Western region. His qinggong is amazing, and his moves are strange. This subordinate has fought with him before, and his qinggong is above this subordinate's. The black mites enter the bodies of these palace maids through his teeth. A portion of the black mites will crawl out of the two-headed man's mouth by following the smell of blood, and enter the palace maids' bodies through their bites. From there, they devour their flesh and blood, and control their bodies. Ji Chu said honestly, "These palace maids have been locked up here for a short period of time. The black mites don't have blood to feed them, so they can only slowly devour their bones to satisfy their hunger. Until the last bit of their bones is devoured, these black mites will also starve to death and become a puddle of black water." I see. Shen Yueji had always thought that it was some people in the harem who were manipulating things. She had never imagined that people from the Western regions would be involved. If that's the case, have you found out who else is behind the two-headed man? This two-headed man's whereabouts are strange and cunning, plus this matter. Ji Chu coughed awkwardly and lowered his voice. "My master did not let me investigate this matter. When corpses appeared in Diaoyang Palace, my master would take into consideration the peace of the late empress and would order this subordinate to move all these corpses here, allowing them to slowly die completely." Shen Yueji choked. She also liked to see things that were harmful to Feng Jiuqing. But this two-headed monster had placed the incident in her Diaoyang Palace, and she was not happy to see it. She frowned. "Actually, there's nothing wrong with letting the people in the palace know that these palace maids died in Diaoyang Palace. Your Highness, you want Feng Jiuqing to know about the existence of people from the Western region?" The man's ink-black eyes fell on her, and his impeccable handsome face had an additional cold aura. But other than that, there was no other emotional fluctuation. If one listened carefully, one would notice that there was a hint of sadness under this cold voice. What was she? Chapter 67. The former empress had been married to the emperor for more than 9 years, but she was only the empress for 3 days. Now that the new emperor has ascended the throne, the Feng country is prosperous and the new empress is deeply respected by the people and ministers. Shen Yueji shrugged. No matter what, the former empress was humiliated when she was alive and forgotten after her death because of the regent. Now someone is bringing up the past and reminding people of the former emperor. Why do you want to hide this matter? Shen Yueji, here it comes again. Ji Chu looked worried. He was already prepared to flee with her the moment his master made a move against her. His master did things in a fit of anger without considering the consequences. This was the eldest daughter of the Shen family. She couldn't be killed. To hell with it. Mo Wushang's face was surprisingly calm. Ji Chu's expression changed from worry to horror. Was he bewitched? The person behind the scenes used the former empress's palace to make such a big move to make people remember the former empress. Maybe it's a good thing for the former empress. Besides, I also want to know. The man's throat tightened as if something was stuck in it. His white fingertips twirled. Say it. Shen Yueji looked at him. I want to lure the two-headed man out and force him to know who the mastermind is. What is the purpose of using the former empress's name? Then, she added, don't worry. I just want to know. If it's beneficial to the former empress, I will pretend not to know. But the two-headed man's lightness skill is excellent. It's easy to lure him out, but difficult to catch him. I'm afraid it will be difficult to capture him in the Imperial Palace without the people in the Imperial Palace finding out. I have a way. Your Highness, you have a brilliant plan. Ji Chu looked at her in disbelief. Shun Yueji seemed to be different from the timid eldest miss of the Shun family that he knew before. Not only that, Ji Chu felt that the way his master looked at Shun Yueji was not right. As long as the regent is willing to help me, I can lure the two-headed man out and catch him. I just don't know if the Prince Regent is willing to cooperate with me. Shun Yueji's eyes were bright. Regent Prince, you don't have to feel that you are at a disadvantage. The former empress was gentle and kind when she was alive. She would be sad for a long time just by seeing a dead cat or dog, not to mention this two-headed monster that killed people in her Jiayong palace every few days. Find out the exact movements of the two-headed man, who ordered him to kill people in Jiaoyang palace. In this way, we won't have to go through the trouble of secretly dealing with the corpses of those palace maids. Mo Wushang's pitch-black eyes flashed and a strange splendor flashed across them. He stared at her pretty face for a while. Okay. Ji Chu was speechless. Why did he agree so quickly? Shun Yueji couldn't believe that he agreed so quickly. Even if Mo Wushang continued to ignore her like before, she had already prepared her next words. In the end, he agreed too quickly. For a moment, she stood rooted to the ground. The words that were about to come out of her mouth didn't leave her mouth in time. Prince Regent, you agreed so quickly. Aren't you worried that I was deliberately playing with you? Whatever you say is right. Ji Chu was speechless. The man who said this seriously, was he really his master? Shun Yueji was speechless. Could it be that he was really bewitched? Hiding the horror on her face, Shun Yueji smiled and said, the amiable regent is simply too charming. Chapter 68. Shun Yueji didn't know how she came back. She remembered that after she said that, in the dark night, there was more darkness, falling on the man and her. In the cold night, adding warmth, they looked at each other. The man looked at her, his cold and emotionless eyes seemed to have more cracks, and something was melting little by little on his eyebrows. His eyes were overflowing with warmth, filled with a faint smile. The current Mo Wushang was as different as heaven and earth compared to the cold and aloof immortal from the 9 heavens. The current him was like an immortal who had fallen into the mortal world. He could feel the warmth and coldness of human nature. His handsome and exquisite jade face no longer pushed people thousands of miles away, and no longer gave people a sense of fear. He was like an immortal, making people lose their souls. He had enough magic to make thousands of ostentatious people fall in love. Hey! Your Highness, you came back to your senses. A pair of small hands waved in front of her, and Shun Yueji gradually saw the sight in front of her. What's wrong? Shuang she looked at her eagerly. Your Highness, you have been absent-minded since you came back. I called you several times. Did you really go out to have sex with the regent? What? Ah! No, nothing. Realizing what she said, Shuang she quickly covered her mouth. I mean, Your Highness, where did you go so late? Shun Yueji's mouth twitched. Where else can I go? Didn't I just go and investigate something? What? She looked at her coldly. You will know when the time comes. By the way, how did I come back? No. I don't know. I was afraid to disturb Your Highness and the regent, so I stayed outside for a long time. I guessed that you were almost finished, so I came in. Who knew? Finished what? Shun Yueji frowned again. Shuang she automatically skipped it. After coming in, I found that the inner hall was empty, there was nothing. I was worried about Your Highness, but I didn't dare to say anything, so I went outside to look for you. After more than an hour, when I came back, I saw Your Highness lying on the chaise longue, safe and sound, as if you were asleep. Then the scene in front of her appeared. After she woke up, Double Happiness kept waving his hand in front of her eyes. Your Highness, this is the Imperial Palace, His Majesty's territory. You must control yourself. If His Majesty were to find out, Your Highness might end up like the late Empress. Double Happiness's face was full of worry. In the past, the Prince Regent was indifferent to Your Highness, but it wasn't that he was indifferent. In short, he just didn't look at Your Highness. Now, he had suddenly come to her ladyship's palace in the middle of the night. Not only did he carry her ladyship out in the middle of the night, he even dutifully sent her ladyship back. He must be plotting something. Your Highness, you can't be so engrossed in it that you can't pull yourself out of it. You have to be more rational. You're right. Shen Yueji nodded. I also feel that Mo Wushang's attitude towards me has suddenly changed. Even I can't understand it. Isn't that right? Isn't that right, Your Highness? No matter if this servant is the only one who thinks this way, you also feel that something is wrong, right? Ien. But so what? Double happiness. No matter what he is planning, at least what he is doing is beneficial to me. I am alone in the palace, I can't always rely on His Majesty, right? Double happiness. But Your Highness, you are His Majesty's woman. Chapter 69. Everyone in the palace knows that the regent and the emperor are mortal enemies. Your Highness, as the old saying goes, you are cheating on two boats. Am I the kind of person who cares about my reputation? Of course not. Even if you are cheating on two boats, you have to see the situation and timing clearly. In comparison, the regent has no woman by his side, the former empress is gone, and he is only close to me. If I am with him, it will be easier for us to do some things in the palace. She said. Your Highness makes sense. But Your Highness, if you had thought of sucking up to the regent, why did you enter the palace? The general said that whoever Your Highness marries, he will belong to that camp. At that time, Your Highness was wholeheartedly pursuing the regent, and the general and young master were almost ready to rebel. This time, it was Shen Yueji's turn to be shocked. She bit her lower lip aggrievedly. The general didn't let me tell Your Highness. After all, Your Highness has entered the palace, and now the general has already given up that idea. He intends to be loyal to the emperor and will never have second thoughts again. Now that Your Highness is with the regent again, if the general knows, he will probably discuss with young master about the rebellion again. Shen Yueji, Your Highness, don't be afraid. The general and young master are not impulsive people. They have a backup plan. Shen Yueji held her forehead speechlessly. Has the Shen family always been so straightforward? She disagreed with this. Your Highness, what do you mean by the Shen family? Aren't you a Shen family member? Shen Yueji tapped the table with her little hand. Of course I am. I heard that the emperor went to Xianghe Palace these 2 days. At first, I didn't think that the emperor cared much about the empress. Now it seems that the emperor doesn't care about the empress at all. Your Highness, you have to work harder. Since you want to cheat on 2 boats, you can't fall behind on the emperor's side even if you hook up with the regent here. I have already taken the initiative to look for him once. Your Highness doesn't look for the emperor. Do you want the emperor to take the initiative to look for you? Compared to the little girl of the Jiyu family, Your Highness is not inferior at all. Oh, right. Speaking up to this point, Shuangshi's expression suddenly turned mysterious. Your ladyship, the matter you instructed eldest young master to do the day before yesterday, eldest young master has already completed it for your ladyship. That 7th-ranked county magistrate Li Yaro's daughter should be sent to the palace tomorrow. When the time comes, eldest young master will use the excuse that your ladyship isn't used to living in the palace and specially arrange for a servant girl to enter the palace to serve you. His Majesty won't suspect anything. Tomorrow? Shen Yueji's lips curled into a faint smile. Li Yaro's daughter sure came at the right time. Your Highness. Double Happiness looked puzzled. Shen Yueji glanced at her red and swollen hands and said lightly, hasn't it been 3 days since the Empress used my Yulu ointment tomorrow? 3 days have passed. It's time to see the results. Your Highness, this servant is a little worried. This Jiyu Yuyin is always scheming behind the scenes and His Majesty is so biased towards her. If she really does something abnormal tomorrow and His Majesty is too eager to protect her, he won't listen to Your Highness' explanation. Moreover, eldest young master and the general don't know about this. This servant is worried that Your Highness, what's there to worry about? If I can't even deal with Jiyu Yuyin, then I'm not fit to be a member of the Shen family. She covered her mouth and yawned. It's getting late, go back and rest. Chapter 70. At this moment, Xianghe Palace. At dawn, the sky was getting brighter. Feng Jiuqing did not have time to change out of his dragon robe. After dealing with the memorials, He took the dragon carriage to Xiang palace. Your Highness. Your Highness, how are you? Your Highness, summon the imperial physician. Summon the imperial physician. What are you waiting for? Go and inform His Majesty. Hearing the anxious and restless voices coming from inside, Feng Zhouqing furrowed his beautiful brows and took the lead to walk in. Jiao Dezhong, who was behind him, felt uneasy. He vaguely felt that something bad was going to happen. He followed closely behind the emperor. When he saw the inner hall, there was a thin curtain. Inside, there was a graceful woman with messy hair. Her fair and delicate face was wrinkled and stuck together. There were thick blood and ulcers everywhere. Only her eyes were intact. The water droplets were filled with helplessness and misery. Her rotten skin was like a corpse that had decomposed after 3 days. It was scary and eye-catching. Accompanied by a strong stench, people did not dare to look at it directly. The arrival of Feng Zhouqing made the palace maids and eunuchs in the hall kneel in fear. Yu Xiu threw herself at his feet and cried out, Your Majesty, you have to take justice for this servant's Nyang Nyang ah. Nyang Nyang used the jade dew ointment given by concubine Shen 3 times a day, and according to what she said, she applied it all to her face. In the end, Nyang Nyang's face became like this. Your Majesty. Feng Zhouqing's handsome eyebrows were twisted into a dead knot. He walked quickly to the phoenix bed and stretched out his hand to lift the curtain. The little person inside seemed to be frightened. She covered her scarred face and turned her back in fear. Her delicate body was trembling. Your Majesty, please don't look at me. I'm afraid I'll scare you with my current appearance. Her voice was hoarse and it sounded like she had been crying for a long time. Layers of ice blades gathered in her eyes. Feng Zhouqing's dark eyes were like a sharp sword. Jiao Dezhong, with cold sweat on his back, walked forward shakily. Your servant is here. Go to Phoenix Palace and call concubine Shen here. Yes. Your Majesty, her ladyship has always loved this face the most. It must have been Imperial Consort Shen who did something to the medicine that caused her ladyship's face to fester more and more in these 3 days. He saw bones. Your Majesty, if this servant doesn't have this face, how will this servant's consort live? Yu Xiu knelt on the ground and cried. Even Mammy Li, who brought warm water from outside the hall, knelt on the ground when she saw the young emperor standing beside the phoenix bed. This eldest daughter of the Shen family is so ruthless. The empress had no enmity with her. She shouldn't have been jealous of the emperor coming to the empress's place every night. She shouldn't have used such a vicious method to destroy the empress. Your Majesty, the empress is completely relying on you in the palace. You must give justice to the empress Your Majesty. The servants of Xionghe Palace all knelt on the ground, weeping and blaming incessantly. Feng Zhouqing's black eyes were rolling like the waves of the sea. Undulating. He stretched out his big hand to the curtain and sat on the phoenix bed. He pulled the thin and petite body into his arms and hugged it gently. With me here, no one in the harem will dare to bully you. Don't worry, I won't let your face be ruined. If the imperial physician of the imperial hospital is useless, I will ask the genie guards to go out of the palace and find you the best doctor in the world. Your Majesty, this servant's face really can't be ruined. If this servant's face is ruined, I don't want to live anymore. This servant's appearance is like a ghost. How can I be worthy of Your Majesty? Your Majesty. Chapter 71. Feng Zhouqing involuntarily tightened his grip. Listening to the girl's weak and helpless cry, he said in a low voice, No matter what Yina becomes, I will not despise you. But I don't want to be unworthy of Your Majesty. Feng Zhouqing gently stroked her trembling back. No, in the whole world, only Yina is worthy of me. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister and his wife heard that Her Highness was poisoned in the palace, and now they are rushing to the palace. Shen Guifei's methods are extremely ruthless. This kind of concubine with a heart of snakes and scorpions, Your Majesty, you must look at the Jiyu family's loyalty to you and seek justice for your ladyship. Mammy Li's voice was loud and clear. There was a blood stain on her wrinkled forehead. She burst into tears. Her Highness has never been hurt like this since she was a child. If Her Highness's face is ruined, How can she face others in the future? In the court, in the capital, if the empress is an ugly woman, she will definitely be laughed at by the ministers in the court and be criticized. Your Majesty. A gentle and elegant face, when used to be gentle, suddenly ignited the flame of anger, made people dare not look at it. All the servants in Xionghe Palace felt that the atmosphere in the hall was extremely cold. It was so quiet. Even the sound of breathing could be clearly heard. They suppressed their heavy and fearful breathing, for fear that anyone who made a loud sound would be angered. The cold and oppressive air seemed to be able to tear a person's body. However, at this moment, this Yulu ointment, I only have one bottle. When I learned that my sister's face was covered with red rashes, I didn't think about it and quickly took out this ointment for my sister to use. Even if my hand was festering, I still wanted to cure the injury on my sister's face. This concubine's hand is fine. Shen Yueji's almond-shaped eyes were filled with tears, and she wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. From this angle, it could be seen that her originally red and swollen hand was also corroded by the fire orchid. It was not as serious as Jiu Yuan's, but it still made people feel numb. In the face of Shen Yueji's arrival, the extremely cold atmosphere in the hall was once again faced with frost. Everyone lowered their heads and did not dare to raise their heads. Feng Jiuqing's eyes were as cold as a blade. When he saw Shen Yueji's hand, which was also red and swollen, his dark eyes flickered. Empress, even if my Shen family and your Jiu family have always been at odds, you can't frame my lady consort like this, right? My lady consort kindly gave you the only bottle of Yulu ointment, just to treat the wound on your face. You said you were grateful, but behind her back, you ordered your maid to find a place to bury this Yulu ointment, just to frame my lady consort. You've done this, and now you're making a false countercharge. Isn't it because you're relying on His Majesty's love for you? Dare I ask, how can you face my empress by doing this? Double Happiness opened his palm, and the familiar porcelain bottle was reflected in everyone's eyes again. What was different was that this time, the porcelain bottle in her hand was not as lustrous as before. Instead, there was a dull aura. If one looked closely, they could even see a circle of soil on it. Seeing the Yulu ointment in Shuangshi's hands again, not only Mami Li and others, but also Jiu Yuan's face changed. Shen Yueji knelt on the ground, letting the tears in the corner of her eyes slide down her pale cheeks. Chapter 72. Compared to Jiu Yuan's pitiful state, she was more stubborn. Xiao Zhuozi was a servant of the Empress' auspicious Harmony Palace. He saw Yu Xiu bury the jade dew ointment I gave to the Empress under the tree behind the palace. Xiao Zhuozi was young and did not know his place. When he passed by the imperial garden, Shuangshi recognized him and asked if the rash on the Empress' face had improved. The two of them had a good conversation. Xiao Zhuozi spoke his mind and told Double Happiness everything he saw in auspicious Harmony Palace. Shen Yueji looked up at the emperor who had an unfriendly expression. If your majesty does not believe me, you can call Xiao Zhuozi over to confront him. I have only been in the palace for a short while and this Xiao Zhuozi has been in the palace for many years. If Xiao Zhuozi can still be maliciously accused of being one of my people, then I have nothing to say. If your majesty thinks that I am a vicious person like they say, then your majesty can punish me however you want. I will not complain, but I only ask for justice. I do not want to blindly sacrifice myself for Sister Empress only to end up like this. Gao Dezhong summoned Xiao Zhuozi under the emperor's signal. Xiao Zhuozi had never seen such a scene before and was scared out of his wits. He stammered and could not speak clearly. Speak. The emperor rebuked in a low voice. Xiao Zhuozi was furious. Xiao Zhuozi trembled, his lips quivering and his teeth chattering. I saw it with my own eyes. It was Sister Yu Xiu. She gave consortion to Yutu. Yu Xiu's face was red with anger as she shouted, "When did you see it?" You. Gao Dezhong. A gloomy aura spread across the emperor's handsome face as his cold voice was filled with displeasure. The atmosphere in the palace was once again icy cold. Gao Dezhong stepped forward. Your Majesty. Slap yourself 30 times. Yes. Your Majesty. Yu Xiu knelt on the ground, trembling, I know my mistake. I know my mistake. She had forgotten her propriety until the emperor spoke. Only then did Yu Xiu realize that a lowly servant like her had repeatedly contradicted her master's words. She didn't dare to beg for mercy. She knelt on the ground and trembled. Gao Dezhong stepped forward and slapped her delicate face again and again. Clap, clap, clap. Every slap that landed on her face brought with it a burning pain. After 10 slaps, her face was already red and swollen. Then, the 20 slaps didn't stop. She spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. The corner of her mouth was slapped crookedly, and blood dripped down uncontrollably. Continue. It's your majesty. Little Zhuozi's heart was so scared that it was about to stop. After a while, he bit his lip until it bled. The pain brought him back to his senses amidst his deep fear. At that time, your servant had finished his errand and was planning to fetch a few buckets of water to water the flowers and plants in the rear hall. In the end, I saw Yu Xiu. Xiao Zhuozi lowered his head in fear when he saw Yu Xiu's murderous glare. Perhaps it was because Yu Xiu's gaze was too intense that even Feng Zhouqing noticed it. When she saw the emperor looking at her indifferently, Yu Xiu was so frightened that she quickly lowered her head. Chapter 73. This little Zhuozi is a servant of the Empress's bedchamber. He won't lie to me. And this Yulu ointment is stained with soil. Shen Yueji took the Yulu ointment from Shuangxi's hand. She raised it respectfully. Your Majesty, please decide. Gao Dezhong carefully stepped forward, took it from her hand and presented it to the emperor. Feng Zhouqing reached out and took it. His eyes were deep and he looked at it carefully. The porcelain bottle in the palm of his hand was getting tighter, and there was a vague posture of exploding. Then he thought of something and his eyebrows gradually relaxed. Even the Yulu ointment in his hand was in his palm. Empress, he said softly, and his voice was still as gentle as usual. No joy or anger could be heard. In the curtain, Jiyu Yuyin bit her lips and bled. Big pearl-shaped tears rolled down from the corners of her eyes. They dripped on her rotten face, stinging. She had nothing to say. She didn't even have a reason to refute. She said it so firmly that she didn't leave any room for herself to refute. Your Majesty, it has nothing to do with Her Highness. I made the decision without authorization. I told Yueshio to do so. It has nothing to do with Her Highness. Her Highness didn't know about it. At this time, Mammy Li suddenly knelt out and said hoarsely, Your Majesty, don't blame Her Highness. It's all my fault. I didn't want Her Highness to use Imperial Concubine Shen's things. I suspected that Imperial Concubine Shen had bad intentions. I was worried that Imperial Concubine Shen would put drugs in Her Highness's medicine, so I made the decision without authorization and asked Yueshio to bury the Yulu ointment under the tree and throw it away. Imperial Concubine Shen, if you want to blame someone, blame me. It has nothing to do with Her Highness. It's me who doubted your intentions. It's me who measured the heart of a gentleman with my mean measure. Please punish me, Imperial Concubine Shen. Mammy Li, Jiyu Yurin's voice was hoarse and weak. Her Highness, you don't need to say anything. It's all my fault. I made the decision without authorization. I can't implicate Her Highness. Mammy Li knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the emperor again and again. Your Majesty, you know that I have always been the dowry maid of Madam. When Her Highness entered the palace, Madam was worried, so she let me follow Her Highness into the palace to serve her. This servant has watched her ladyship grow up. In her ladyship's heart, she has never treated this servant as a servant, so there are some things that this servant doesn't need to ask for her opinion and can make decisions on her own. No, it has nothing to do with Mammy Li. It's all my fault. I instigated Mammy to do this. If it weren't for me, Mammy Li wouldn't have suspected it. If the emperor wants to punish me, just punish me. Imperial Concubine Shen, it's all my fault. It has nothing to do with Mammy Li or the Empress. You can't wrong a good person. No. Your Majesty. Jiyu Yuyin struggled to get off the phoenix bed. Her frail body was swaying in the wind. She couldn't stand steadily and looked like she was about to fall. Seeing this, Feng Zhouqing quickly stepped forward to support her. Jiyu Yuyin fell into the emperor's arms and cried, "Your Majesty, I beg you, don't punish Mami Li and Yueshio. One of them is my elder, and the other is a maid who grew up with me. Even if they are guilty, please forgive them for the sake of my Jiyu family's hard work and dedication to your Majesty. Your Majesty." Chapter 74. If someone. Shen Yueji waved her hand to stop Shuangxi. "Your Highness." Double happiness gritted her teeth. This Jiyu Yuyin was going too far. Wasn't she relying on the emperor's love and protection to be so lawless? It was clearly her maidservant who had committed a crime, but in the end, with just a few cries, the emperor's heart immediately softened. Why didn't she think that if her master hadn't taken precautions in advance, it would be her master who suffered today? The people of the Shun family were not as favored as Jiyu Yuyin. If it was Her Highness who was implicated today, how could Jiyu Yuyin plead for Her Highness? Even if she plead, it would be hypocritical. Squinting at the emperor's face, Shen Yueji smiled slightly. "In fact, it's nothing. Sister Empress has a deep relationship with the maidservants, so it's reasonable to plead for them. Fortunately, I didn't suffer any harm, so I just let it go. I don't want the emperor to be caught in the middle. Since there's nothing else for me to do here, I'll leave first. Imperial concubine Shin, it's my fault today. I'll personally go to the palace to apologize." "Forget it. Sister Empress has a noble status and I can't afford it. Sister Empress should find an imperial physician as soon as possible to remove the festering marks on your face. Otherwise, I'm afraid that something will happen to the Empress again. At that time, I won't be able to explain myself even if I have 100 mouths." In this case, Jiyu Yuyin could still smile guiltily and reprimand Mami Li and Mami Li, "You should thank Imperial Concubine Shun for sparing your life. Thank Imperial Concubine Shun for sparing our lives. Thank Imperial Concubine Shun, thank Imperial Concubine Shun." Jiyu Yuin's smile was complacent and noisy in Shen Yueji's eyes. Even if she framed her like this, Shen Yueji didn't look at the emperor behind her. When facing Jiyu Yuyin, his punishment had never been fair. I'm so angry. Shuangxi's little face was livid. "I used to think that the emperor was very good, at least to Empress. Now it seems that the emperor is not as good as the regent. It's Jiyu Yuyin who made a mistake. Why should it be left unsettled? If it was you, I don't know what he would have done to you." Shen Yueji raised her head and looked at the gloomy sky. She sighed. The emperor likes the empress so much. Now that she has become like this, his heart is already aching. How could he punish the maids by her side and hurt her heart? She thought that Shen Yueji's heart wouldn't waver after seeing him protect Jiyu Yuyin again. He had already expected this to be the truth. However, when she truly saw him again, a sense of mockery gathered in her heart, causing great waves to rise in her heart. "But is your ladyship going to suffer for nothing? Compared to the Jiyu family, our Shen family is not any weaker." Shuangxi's voice trembled. "You're still too impatient." Shen Yueji shook her head. "Do you want Ben Gong to beg and force the emperor to punish the empress?" "My lady, it's not necessarily a bad thing to advance by retreating. But her ladyship has never been one to retreat." Shen Yueji closed her eyes and smiled. "I want to retreat now. For the first time, I feel that it's not necessarily not good to let myself suffer a little." Leaving a sentence that Shuangxi didn't understand, Shen Yueji left. Shuangxi stood in the same place and thought for a long time, but couldn't think of any clues. Chapter 75. Back to Fengqi Palace. Shen Yueji didn't care about the wound on her hand and fell into a deep sleep on the bed. Shuangxi thought that she was in low spirits, which made sense. The grievances that the empress had suffered today, if it had been anyone else, they probably wouldn't have been able to endure it. She didn't dare to disturb her, so she tucked her in and left carefully. Your Majesty." Outside the hall, Shuangxi was shocked when she saw the young emperor in a bright yellow dragon robe. She quickly bowed to salute. Feng Jiuqing raised his hand slightly. "Where is your concubine?" Concubine was not in a good mood after she came back, so she went to bed early. Shuangxi's eyes were red and swollen, I advised Concubine to call an imperial physician to see the wound on her hand, but Concubine turned a blind eye to my words and let her hands fester and bleed. She wanted to say more. She looked up, but Feng Jiuqing was nowhere to be seen. Only before he entered the hall, he said, "You can leave. Shuangxi, you don't need to be angry with the emperor. You think the emperor doesn't uphold justice for concubine Shen." Shuangxi squinted at Jiao Dezhong and didn't speak. Jiao Dezhong sneered, "The emperor is not the kind of person who can't distinguish right from wrong. When you left, the emperor had ordered people to cut off Yueshio's tongue and punished Mami Li with 50 strokes." Hearing this, Shuangxi suddenly looked up, and the haze on her face was swept away. "What eunuch Jiao said is true." Jiao Dezhong nodded. "When did I lie? Mami Li is old and her body is not as good as that of young people. If it was anyone else, even a man might not be able to bear the 50 strokes, let alone a woman. I'm afraid Mami Li will die after 50 strokes. What about the empress? The empress is in Xianghe Palace, and the emperor asked her to take care of the wound on her face first." This time, Shuangxi finally showed a smile on her face. "It seems that the emperor is very good to my concubine. Isn't it? Concubine Shen is the first person who can make the empress like this." Jiao Dezhong chuckled and echoed. In a hall, Shen Yueji didn't know how long she had slept. She opened her eyes and found a tall and slender figure sitting in front of the bed. The figure looked so familiar that she thought she was still in a dream. "Since you're already awake, stop pretending to be asleep." The man's gentle words came from above her head. Shen Yueji opened her eyes slowly and saw the man's gentle and handsome face. She pulled her hand out from his big palm. When she saw the Yulu ointment he had applied on it, she was slightly surprised. "You applied the Yulu ointment on my hand. What about the empress's face?" Feng Jiuqing's expression did not change. "Zhen have already sent someone to the general residence to let General Shun make another bottle of this jade dew ointment and send it to the palace." Hearing this, Shen Yueji pursed her dry lips. Feng Jiuqing glanced at her, got up, and walked to the tea table. He poured the tea with his fair hands, and his entire person looked extremely elegant and noble. "Are you blaming me for not upholding justice for you and making you suffer?" "What justice? It's not like I've lost anything." Hearing the indignation in her words, Feng Jiuqing smiled bitterly and walked over to her with a teacup in his hand. Looking at the warm tea sent to the emperor's mouth, Shen Yueji turned her head away awkwardly and reached out to take it. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Feng Jiuqing sat silently on the edge of the bed, his almond-shaped eyes watching as she drank the tea in the teacup. Chapter 76. Your Majesty, you don't have to feel wronged. My endurance is stronger than those women in the harem. I won't cry and hang myself because of a little thing and make trouble for you. The man couldn't help laughing and smiled helplessly. "You don't have to force yourself. I have ordered people to prepare lunch. Get up and eat something." "Your Majesty, are you not leaving today?" Shen Yueji's words stunned Feng Jiuqing. Then he chuckled. "Didn't Imperial Concubine say that I will accompany you for a while every few days?" Without giving her a chance to speak, the man paused for a while and said, "According to Imperial Concubine, you don't want me to stay here?" Shen Yueji quickly got up from the bed and bent over to put on her shoes. After putting on her shoes, she walked to the man in 2 steps, looked up at him and said directly, "I don't want to." Regardless of whether the emperor was angry or not, she quickly ran out after saying these 2 words. Feng Jiuqing was left alone in the same place, recalling the 2 words she said decisively before she ran out. "I don't want to," he chuckled. This girl was really not afraid of him at all. There were some vegetarian dishes on the table. Knowing that she liked sweet food, at least 5 of the 10 dishes were sweet. Shen Yueji deliberately found a seat far away from him and sat opposite him. In short, she was not close to him. Feng Jiuqing didn't care about her and ate elegantly with chopsticks. Shen Yueji buried herself in eating alone and ate for about half the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. Double Happiness came in obediently, leaned close to her ear, and said a few words carefully. "Your Majesty, I think this fish is very good. It's delicious. Your Majesty will be very nourished after eating it." Unexpectedly, a red and swollen little hand appeared in front of him, holding a large piece of white fish and putting it into his bowl. He heard the squeaking sound of the little girl pulling the stool. As he breathed, a wisp of the girl's delicate fragrance came to his nose. Feng Jiuqing nodded and glanced at the little head beside him. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Imperial concubine has been guarding against me just now. What's wrong now? There is no overnight hatred between husband and wife. Your Majesty is so good to me, why should I guard against your Majesty? Your Majesty, try this dish and see if it suits your taste. Feng Jiuqing took a bite of the food she picked for him, and the smile on his face disappeared. Did Guifei forget that Shen doesn't like sweet food? As soon as he finished speaking, he saw Shen Yueji put another piece of bacon into his bowl, mix the sweet and the salty together. You won't get tired of it. She was speechless. Concubine, you're going to puke if you eat this kind of mixture. Didn't she just say a few words in the Empress's ear that the Emperor punished Mami Li and Yu Xiu? Her purpose was to prevent the Imperial concubine from giving the Emperor the cold shoulder. After all, the Emperor was the ruler of a country. If the Imperial concubine offended the Emperor, what could she do? But similarly, she burst into tears. She didn't think that the Empress's face would change so quickly. During the meal, Shen Yueji would give the man a few dishes from time to time, sometimes salty and sometimes sweet. The man did not resist at all. Whatever she picked up, he would eat. These dishes couldn't be compared to the delicacies of the past. They were all simple dishes to take care of her wounds. When she was almost done eating, Shen Yueji rubbed her round belly. Your Majesty, Prime Minister Ji Yu wants to see you. At this time, Jiao Dezhong came in from outside and whispered a few words in the Emperor's ear. But the Emperor's expression changed for a moment, and soon returned to normal. He got up and gently rubbed Shen Yueji's little head. I will go to the Imperial study first. After finishing my business, I will accompany you in the evening. Chapter 77. Great, in this way, Your Highness is favored again. Clutching her full stomach, Shen Yueji waved her hand to let her remove the food. I have an appointment with the regent to go to Jiayang Palace to catch the two-headed man. Now, if the Emperor really comes at night, I won't be able to go to Jiayang Palace. The Emperor reads the memorials until late every night. This servant thinks that when the Emperor comes here, it will be almost midnight. It won't hinder Your Highness from having a date with the regent at night. Great, Your Highness, in this way, the Empress will lose two right-hand men at once. In addition, the Emperor's face is rotten and needs a long time to recuperate. These days, I'm afraid the Emperor will come to accompany Your Highness. It seems that the time for Your Highness to be favored is just around the corner. Lifting her eyelids, Shen Yueji smiled faintly. You are still too naive. Our Shen family has people in the palace, how can the Jiyu family not have them? Mami Li is Jiyu Yuerin's trusted maid. Even if the Emperor orders her to be flogged 50 times, how do you know that she won't do something behind her back and spare her life? Don't treat Jiyu Yuyin as a fool, this person is slow. Let's go to Jiayang Palace. Jiayang Palace Imperial Concubine Shen, my master has been waiting for a long time, please. When they came to the familiar pavilion, Ji Chu saw her coming, bowed respectfully and raised his hand. Double Happiness stood outside the pavilion, while Shen Yueji entered the pavilion and walked into the pavilion. The man had been here for some time. Today, he was wearing a large black brocade robe. His beautiful black hair was scattered behind his head like a waterfall. His face was fair and handsome, and there was a kind of beauty that could make all things sink into him. Unexpectedly, he didn't drink wine today. There were some exquisite side dishes on the stone table, and there was no lack of sweet pastries. Did the regent think it through overnight and think that living is more important? Shen Yueji smiled and walked to the seat opposite him and sat down. She didn't stand on ceremony and picked up a piece of vegetable with chopsticks and put it in her mouth. Double Happiness, who was far outside the pavilion. Your Highness, didn't you just eat too much? If I'm not mistaken, the two-headed man should take action at night. I wonder if the regent has chosen a suitable woman in the palace. Mo Wushang quietly picked up a dish for her. The food fell into the bowl, and Shen Yueji was quite flattered. The man's calm and collected behavior was so perfect that no one could find any flaws. She silently shoved the food into her mouth and ate it cleanly. She saw the man stretch out his hand towards her again. His snow-white hand had distinct bones and was straight and slender. His gaze landed on the corner of her mouth, gently wiping away the residue on her lips. For some reason, when that ice-cold hand touched her face, Shen Yueji's little face turned slightly red. "Regent, aren't we progressing too fast? It's better to be quick about this kind of thing." Shen Yueji was speechless. Why did she feel that something was wrong? She turned her head awkwardly and dodged his hand. The man didn't show any displeasure. He retracted his hand and calmly ate his meal. Shen Yueji stared at him for a while. "Although I'm not a good person, there are good and bad servants in the palace. If the regent finds a little palace maid who has just entered the palace and hasn't done anything wrong, let her be the bait to attract the two-headed man and die, following her." This sentence has not yet finished. Chapter 78. She turned her head and was slightly surprised. "You Xiao?" The woman in front of her, who was tied up, had a frightened expression and a swollen mouth. Who else could it be but Yu Xiao? She recalled that she had just been punished by Feng Jiuqing with 30 slaps and had her tongue cut off. She should be recuperating in auspicious Harmony Palace now. How did Mo Wushang bring her here quietly? "Your Highness, Master feels that Lady Yu Xiao is suitable to be the bait to attract the two-headed man." Shen Yueji smiled slightly. Indeed, in this world, there is no one more suitable than Yu Xiao. Yu Xiao didn't understand what they were talking about, but when she saw Shen Yueji and Mo Wushang sitting together, her heart involuntarily gave birth to infinite fear and panic. She couldn't open her mouth, couldn't speak, and could only stare at them helplessly. Her widened eyes were filled with tears and fear of them. She didn't know what was going on. She was recuperating in her own room. Her Highness specially allowed her not to serve her for half a month, so she lay on the bed to recuperate. Not long after, when she woke up, she was already here. "The two-headed monster is very picky. I saw that the few palace maids he sucked before were all good-looking. This Yu Xiao's tongue was cut off and her mouth was bruised. I'm afraid that the two-headed man won't buy it. Shuangxi, lead Lady Yu Xiao into Jiaoyang Palace and dress her up." "Yes, Your Highness." Night fell quickly. Shen Yueji and Mo Wushang sat in the main hall. The main hall of Jiaoyang Palace was brightly lit. Except for the crackling sound of candlelight, it was exceptionally quiet. The wind outside was very loud, and the rustling sound caused the stones to fly. From time to time, there would be an even louder sound. The wind was very strong, and accompanied by the damp smell of the night, the dark and gloomy atmosphere, especially in this palace where someone had died, made the atmosphere even more abnormal. Not far away, under the illumination of the moonlight, two thin and small figures could be vaguely seen. Shuangxi untied Yu Xiao, smeared something on her snow-white neck, and then pushed her to the ground. As for Yu Xiao, she didn't have any strength to resist and was pushed to the ground by her. Her eyes were filled with terror. Now that her legs were free, she tried to get up from the ground, but no matter how much strength she used, it was all in vain. Looking into her fearful eyes, Shuangxi coldly smiled. "I've seen that two-headed man once. He had 2 heads and 2 different faces, but no matter which face it was, he was a handsome man. Yu Xiao, it's not a loss to use you as bait." Her face told me what she wanted to say. Shuangxi lifted her chin. "I don't care if you are a member of the Jiyu family or a trusted servant of the Empress. Offending my Nyang means death. If it weren't for the Prince Regent, I'm afraid you would have lived for a few more days. You can only blame the Prince Regent for being too good to my lady." The fear in her eyes was gradually replaced by a layer of doubt. Shuangxi didn't give her a chance to speak. He turned her thin and delicate body over and rubbed a few drops of fragrant powder on her body. Seeing that it was almost night, he slowly found a dense pile of grass and hid. Shaw. The wind was getting louder and louder. Sharp stones were blown up from the ground, like hail falling from the snow, and fell to the ground, causing a burst of noise. Chapter 79. Dark red blood flowed down her delicate snow-white skin, drenching her clothes and dripping onto the ground. "Big brother, I can smell this woman's fragrance from afar. It's really fragrant. I can imagine how delicious this little beauty's blood is." In the darkness, the tall and straight man was like a demon-faced Rakshasa who had crawled out from the netherworld. One gentle and one hard. The gentle and beautiful man's face was so white that it looked like it had been smeared with powder. The corner of his mouth was even redder than the blood. He licked his lips seductively and looked at a palace maid not far away with a drooling gaze. It was a thin and small back. The bright and clean back was dyed red with blood. The thin lapels of her clothes were torn in several places and the delicate skin underneath was faintly discernible. Coupled with the few scratches on her back, it was a fatal temptation to men. His appeared on the roof of Jiaoyang Palace. Shun Yueji looked at the two-headed man who walked out of the darkness. Previously, she did not dare to look too directly at him because she was afraid of being discovered by him. Now that she looked at him seriously, she realized that this two-headed man's exquisite and beautiful face had reached a stage that could shock the heavens and make the gods weep. The feminine man had an excessively fair face. He was dressed in a pink robe and his figure was exquisite and alluring. He was even more exquisite than a woman. His hands and face were so white that they looked like they had been smeared with powder. Even the winter snow could not describe how white he was. On the other side, the masculine man exuded a kind of unapproachable aura from head to toe. His entire body was cold enough to destroy the heavens and earth. His face was like a knife and his lips were like a knife. Very good looking. Perhaps because she was too focused, she almost forgot that there was a man standing beside her. Until he draped a cloak over her body. Shun Yueji found the man's cold voice and raised her head to look at him. His line of sight was not on her body. His dark and gloomy eyes stared at the man below. His gloomy and cold words made one feel as if there was a thorn in their backs. He's good-looking, but compared to the regent's peerless beauty, I can only say that this man's two faces added together are not even a tenth of the regent's. She didn't know if her words had pleased Mo Wushang. In short, the cold aura emanating from his body had lessened significantly. Ji Chu said that this two-headed man is from the Western region. Do people from the Western region all look like this? These are twins. Twins? Not bad. Ji Chu chimed in from the side, twins are not common in the Western regions. They are two babies in the womb, their bodies fused together, only their heads are separated. To be precise, there are two of them. No wonder that effeminate man called him Big Brother. Shun Yueji frowned. She thought that there was a monster living in his body. Beware of traps. Just as the feminine man was about to step forward, the cold-faced man suddenly reached out and stopped him. What trick? You weren't this cautious when you sucked the blood of those palace maids. The effeminate man said disapprovingly, what's more, it's the middle of the night in the abandoned palace of the late empress. What kind of trick could there be? Ordinary palace maids and eunuchs would have run away in fear upon seeing us like this. Could it be that someone deliberately set up a trap to catch us? Chapter 80. The man's face was peerless in appearance and incomparably handsome. When she saw the man appear in front of her, Yu Xiu's initial fear turned into desire. But when she saw the man's two heads sharing a body, she suddenly recovered from her infatuation. Her almond-shaped eyes were filled with tears and her mouth was wide open. Her mouth was empty and there was nothing in it. Large mouthfuls of blood flowed out from her wide-open mouth. The pungent smell of blood caused the feminine man's eyes to burn fiercely. This little palace maid's blood is really fragrant. Woo woo woo. Woo woo woo. He forced himself to make a sound. Yu Xiu's acupuncture point was sealed and she couldn't move. Her almond-shaped eyes were filled with hot tears that rolled down her cheeks. What kind of monster was this? When did such a monster appear in Jiaoyang Palace? The feminine man couldn't care less about the man's warning. The pungent smell of blood led him forward. He pounced towards Yu Xiu and pressed her under his body. His snow-white nose pressed against the woman's neck and rubbed against the smooth, tender, and sweet smell. Little beauty, you are really fragrant. After drinking so many palace maids' blood, there really isn't any palace maid's blood that is as fragrant and sweet as yours. Let me have a taste first and see if this taste is as good as I imagined it to be. Wu Yuxiu's eyes widened. She felt two sharp and long teeth penetrate through her blood vessels and straight into her neck. At that moment, not only was there intense fear, but there was also a heart-wrenching pain. She felt her blood slowly being sucked into the man's mouth through the bite wound on her neck. Gulp, gulp, it was the sound of the man swallowing blood. In this quiet and gloomy dark night, endless terror and horror emerged. The cold-faced man saw his infatuated appearance and his eyes were dyed with a strong lustful light. His crimson lips and two sharp white teeth were exposed under the moonlight. He lowered his head and aimed at the other side of Yuxiu's clean and smooth neck. Poochie, his teeth sank into the flesh. In half an hour, when the drug takes effect, you can go down and capture them. Looking at the creepy scene below the roof, he felt his blood run cold. Yuxiu's delicate face quickly turned purple. Her blood was sucked out of her body, leaving only her flesh and skin. Without the nourishment of fresh blood, she was like a walking corpse. Shen Yueji pondered for a moment. Don't worry about Yuexiu. She's Jiyu Yuan's trusted maid. Even if we hide her body, Jiyu Yuan won't let it go if she can't find her. Yes. Ji Chu accepted the order and withdrew. Halfway there, he realized that something was wrong. No. Why did he listen to Shen Yueji? He turned his head and looked at his master's expression. Ji Chu looked at Mo Wushang with a strange expression. Why wasn't master angry at all? On the contrary, he didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the way his master looked at Shen Yueji was similar to the way the late empress used to look at the late empress. Deep in his eyes, there was a tinge of fear. Shen Yueji could not help but frown when she noticed that he had gone back the way he came. Why aren't you going down to help double happiness? Ji Chu. Yes. Prince Regent, why don't you guess which concubine this two-headed man belongs to? Chapter 81. Accustomed to the man's indifference, Shen Yueji smiled faintly and was about to speak. Are you so sure that he is under the orders of one of the concubines in the harem? Of course, not everyone can enter a place like the royal palace as they please, Prince Regent. Shen Yueji raised her brows slightly. They work in Jiayang Palace, but they do not hide there. Apart from the regent, I know that the emperor will also come here. According to the regent and the emperor's martial arts, if they want to know that there is someone in Jiayang Palace who should not be there, they would have already known and would not have allowed him to do as he pleases until now. So I am sure that they are under the orders of one of the concubines in the harem. And this concubine's identity is not simple. I just don't know if the regent is interested in uncovering the person behind the scenes. The man's voice was cold and familiar. What good will it do me to help you? Shen Yueji chuckled. If you help me, you will naturally help the late empress. The regent likes the late empress so much that this two-faced man has set his sights on Jiayang Palace many times, disturbing the late empress' peace. The regent has to deal with the palace maids' corpses while ordering people to monitor them. What are they trying to do in Jiayang Palace? Shen Yueji's long eyelashes gently trembled as she smiled. Now that we have joined forces to uncover the person behind the scenes and interrogate him, won't it save the regent a lot of trouble? Mo Wushang's black eyes were as dark as ink, and it was impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. After solving the matter of the two-headed man, the regent does not have to worry about me continuing to pester you. As long as the regent does not agree, I will not take the initiative to find you. In an instant. Shen Yueji did not know if it was an illusion, but the man's deep eyes suddenly shrank. The cold aura around his body suddenly dropped. Shen Yueji did not know where she had said something wrong to provoke him. She subconsciously took a few steps back, distancing herself from him. After using me, you want to kick me away? Mo Wushang frowned, his pair of sword-like eyes cold and frightening. Of course not. No matter what, we are in a cooperative relationship. If the regent thinks that this empress has performed well and wants to continue working with this empress will gladly accept. Shen Yueji said angrily. Looking at the man's handsome face, the coldness gradually disappeared. After pondering for a long time, he said, continue to work together. Shen Yueji. Not good, it's a trap. In the pitch-black cold night, the cold wind seemed to have lessened. Standing up from Yu Xiu's warm body, the cold-faced man's face was as cold as stone. He clenched his fists and found that he could not exert any strength. Not only him, but even the feminine-looking man also felt that something was wrong. Strange. He was fine just now. Why did he suddenly lose all his inner energy? Shen Yueji turned to look at them when she heard the commotion. He estimated that it was about time for the medicine to take effect. You can move your men now. She hid the strange expression on her face and lowered her voice beside Mo Wushang. The man nodded slightly and raised his hand. I told you to be careful of traps. How could this little palace maid watch us approach without moving? Someone must have deliberately placed her here as bait to lure us out. Chapter 82. Damn it. The effeminate-looking man spat angrily. How dare you set me up? If I find out who it is, I'll gnaw his bones and drink his blood. I'll grind his bones to ashes. Swish, swish, swish. A few hidden weapons flew in their direction. They were as fast as lightning. The cold-faced man was shocked and was the first to react. He pushed the effeminate-looking man's head hard. Get out of the way. Bang! The hidden weapons struck a large rock behind them, and in a split second, an earth-shattering sound rang out. Bang! The broken stone cracked in front of their eyes, stirring up dust on the ground. Damn it! The two-headed man cursed. Go. Want to leave? Double Happiness flashed out from behind the grass with a whip in her hand. Looking at the two men's heads, one sinister and the other tough, the long whip in his hand cracked loudly, making him look like a hooligan. Where do you think you can run after being hit by my concubine's bone-softening powder? Smells so good. Double Happiness's appearance made the effeminate-looking man's anger instantly turn into desire. He stretched his nose hard to smell her. Smells even better than that little palace maid just now. His sexy tongue licked his lips charmingly, and his pink lips were more tempting than crystal grapes. His eyes were like silk, with a kind of charm. Just looking at him, Double Happiness's grip on the whip loosened for a moment. The beauty of the man in front of her seemed to have a kind of magic power. That kind of magic was like a fairy living in his eyes. The fairy who was using witchcraft was seducing her. What's going on? Sensing that something was wrong with Double Happiness, Shen Yueji couldn't help but stand up straight and watch the two men and one woman arguing. Because Shuangshi's back was facing her, she couldn't see the change in Shuangshi's expression. She could only see Shuangshi's straightened back and the whip in her hand gradually leaving her hand. Her entire body seemed to be controlled, and she walked uncontrollably towards the two-headed monster. Seduced. The man's faint voice sounded in her ear. The corner of Shen Yueji's mouth twitched. How can you say these words so calmly? What do you mean seduced? How could Double Happiness be seduced by mere beauty? Is this also a kind of GU that the people of the western regions have? Mo Wushang narrowed his cold eyes, whom he then looked at the two-headed monster. The feminine-looking man's lips curled up into a seductive smile. His lips were slightly parted, tender and alluring. No one knew what he was saying. Opposite him, Double Happiness had already let go of the whip in his hand. His thin and small body walked towards them uncontrollably. He was only one step away from the two-headed man. The effeminate-looking man had a smug smile on his face as he extended his hand toward Double Happiness. Her sexy pink tongue licked her sweet lips. This woman's body was indeed more fragrant than that little palace maid's. Fresh blood must be delicious to drink. Be careful. The cold-faced man narrowed his eyes and struck the feminine man's outstretched hand back. Before the feminine-looking man could say anything, a cold light flashed in front of him. Fortunately, they reacted in time. Otherwise, his outstretched hand would have been cut off by this cold light. The empty cold light swept towards the big tree behind them at an unimaginable speed. The trunk of the tree was like a stone. In an instant, it split into pieces. The sound of it splitting resounded through the sky. Chapter 83. Ji Chu stood in front of Shuangshi, the hilt of the sword in front of her eyes. The sword returned to its sheath and a cold light flashed in front of her eyes. Shuang, she suddenly came to her senses. She looked at Ji Chu in front of her, then at where she was standing and her empty hands. What happened? Where's my whip? Ji Chu? It's really you. The cold-faced man recognized him and his dark eyes were a little surprised. Did the regent send you to arrest us? The regent? The feminine man sneered and said in a rather disdainful voice, Since when did the regent use such despicable means? He actually dared to secretly poison us. If you have the ability, let's fight fair and square. Of course the regent wouldn't use such despicable means. It's used by my concubine. Shen Yueji, Ji Chu. Mo Wushang, Shuang, she looked proud. The regent can't be bothered with you. Your maid is quite special. Hearing the man's sarcastic tone, Shen Yueji's face turned green and she chuckled. Quite special. Looks like this two-headed monster is quite afraid of you. She couldn't miss the fear that flashed across their faces when they mentioned Mo Wushang. Ji Chu's appearance had even caused him to give up on his attempt to struggle. Let's go down. The man raised his eyebrows and his hand fell on her waist subconsciously. Shen Yueji was shocked and dodged his big hand. I'll walk down myself. The man didn't give her a chance to walk. He directly put his arm around her waist and jumped down from the roof without saying anything. The two-headed monster was greatly surprised by the appearance of the two people. Seeing how intimate they were, especially with Mo Wushang's hand still on her waist, he had no intention of letting go. The handsome brows of the cold-faced man deepened. Everyone knew that the regent was infatuated with the former empress. But tonight, seeing her with an unfamiliar woman in her arms, their words and actions so intimate, the feminine man's reaction was different from the cold-faced man's. Shen Yueji's appearance made his pair of charming eyes full of color. You smell better. Shen Yueji looked at him. The man's eyes were black, but upon closer inspection, they were pink. In the depths of his eyes, there was a mesmerizing pink circle. When he smiled, the pink circle would deepen. She had only looked at it for a while, but the pink circle was like a deep whirlpool that wanted to suck her in. She shook her head violently and averted her gaze from the effeminate man's. This isn't a good place to talk. Ji Chu, bring them back to Mink Sun Palace. Yes. The two-headed monster didn't resist and obediently walked in front. They didn't make any noise until they reached the secret chamber at the back of the Jiaoyang Palace. No wonder the corpses of the palace maids couldn't be found. Big Brother and I were curious about where the regent hid them for so long. So it's here. The feminine man casually sat on the round chair with his hands on the tea table. His pair of seductive eyes fell on Shen Yueji's body. He didn't hide his nakedness at all. The fragrance on your body is the most fragrant I've ever smelled in my life. Bang, there was a loud sound. The two-headed man's body flew out uncontrollably and hit the hard stone wall. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.